Okay, so let's get away from my face and get into Fusion. Neat. All right, so I want to talk to everybody about how you're going to go up printing these. Obviously, you need to have the slicer open and ready to work with that too. And if it shows that it needs to be updated, then do that or do it later, doesn't matter. All right, so simple box. Now, if you made your model, excuse me, the same height on the top as the lid is, the same height as the base, excellent. And I didn't specify this, that's okay. All you have to do to print this, we're going to open this thing entirely, so fully 180, so that looking at it flat, both sides touch the ground the exact same way. Excellent. Now, so far I've been having everybody hit revert position. When you open it, leave it slightly ajar or anything like that. On the upper right-hand corner, the tool pops up, position. Do you want to capture the new position or revert it? This time, I do actually want to capture this current position. That will now set the fully open position as the way to use this, or as the way to export this. Now, to print this, I'm going to go with my standard 3D print, but I want to select both of these. Ordinarily, I would not be doing that. Or if it's not letting me select them both at the same time, do not move them, just leave it as is. Hit OK, and we'll go with lid. Repeat 3D print, base, OK, base, neat. Now I'm going to change over to, come on, my slicer program, and I'm going to drag and drop both of those in there. So that means I'm going to need both the lid and the base. Now, unfortunately, it looks like it did not save the positions. That's definitely a problem. So for the lid, I'm going to go ahead and swap it over. But the problem is I really wanted these to be aligned in position. So let's switch back over. You could absolutely print these separately. The problem is we made these spheres, these retaining spheres, large enough to where it might not work properly, as in it's going to be kind of a pain to get those to snap together. If it ends up being that way, or if you think it will be, or if we have to print these things separately, I would recommend shrinking these little spheres a little bit, just so they're just not as large. That's all. Because the size we made them, it works great if you can lock everything together and print it as one solid thing, but if you can't, won't be. So let me switch back over to Fusion. And let's try to get both of these properly. And this time, instead of going to 3D print, let's go to export. And I don't want this as a FDM. I want this as a, let's try an STL file. This is the default setting that all of these models go as. So I'm just going to save it as an STL file, see if that works how I want it to. I'm going to go back to my slicer. Come on. Really gets frustrating sometimes. And delete both of these. And now, drag and drop that. Plop. So as a singular object, excellent. That's what I wanted it to have happen. So if you're printing it this way, as is, with both objects linked together, I'm going to have to save it. Instead of going to 3D print, I'm going to have to use export. It ends up with the exact same thing. Most important thing to remember is the file type. We have not really talked about file types just yet, but the one we are going to stick with for the moment is STL, stereolithogram file. There are other versions. The one it defaults to is .3FM or F3M. Forget. That's the same kind of. It's a different kind of file type. Perfectly fine. So is object file .obj. Those are more complex files. Not that that's a problem. Just STL is the simplest one. That'll work well. So beyond that, we're going to go do the exact same things we normally would. Check our materials, check our draft, slice it, see what it'll do. So that container That's only going to take an hour, or like an hour and 20 minutes. Not bad. But I do want to check something real quick. As I drag my slider bar down to kind of look at this, I want to double check something. So one of the things we talked about before is, all right, good. Those little spheres, it does have a little gap. However, it might be problematic, the lid onto the base. So we're going to test them. We're going to do a test piece, and then we're going to see if we need to adjust our gaps a little bit. But for now, we're going to treat it as is, and we're going to print one of these as a test piece. But otherwise, that's going to work perfectly well if your object is like 50-50. If not, no problem. I'm going to go ahead and export this just so I can say something we can test in a minute. All right, let me go back to the plater, and I'll delete this so we can try another one. Switch back to Fusion. Well, what if we have a model that is instead different sizes? Well, that would be something like this Matchbox container I made. Shift colors. Now, I'm not going to worry about the matches inside. We're obviously not printing those parts. Now, with something like this, it might actually be best to print it exactly as it is, because we can't just leave this open all the way. Well, this one doesn't open all the way because I have set the thing. And unless you shrink the pins, the little retaining spheres a bit, it's not going to be able to assemble very well. You've got two tabs over one, and you're going to try to smash those together. Well, the size of those spheres is going to push it out of the way. So if you want to go back in your model and shrink the spheres, great. But otherwise, we should be able to print this exactly as it is. It might be kind of a pain to open a little bit, but we'll see. So as is, same deal. We'll leave it just as it was. Select both the lid and the base. We go to File. Instead of 3D Print, we go to Export. And again, save as an STL. There we go. Let me hop over back to Slicer. Import that, my Matchbox. Bloop. Okay, that's a tiny Matchbox. And same deal, slicey, slicey. Now, I'm immediately seeing a problem. This is the issue if you try to join, if they are linked together. This is what I was talking about. If things are too close together, it's going to want to print as a solid object. I don't see a gap there at all. Also, my model is actually slightly too small. One of the things I want to show you, if your models are too small, those little indents I made, you see these odd gaps in the model? That's because the thickness of the wall is smaller than the diameter of the extruder on the printer. That means it's too small and it simply will not print. So this was a problem for mine. Obviously, I can change the thickness of the walls and that would be no problem. Or I can literally make this bigger and be no problem. But that's just one of the things. I made this really small, much too small for what we're doing. So how do I fix this if I run into oh no, it's going to print as like one solid object? That's very not good. All right, so that's what I was just talking about. We're going to have to go back and print this as two separate objects. So back over to Fusion again. And what that means is we were originally making these models with, and let me open up my container here. Where was my spheres? Right there. Onto the base. So I was originally making these models with a much larger tab. That would work pretty well, but it looks like I would need to just adjust this. So let's instead make that a little bit smaller for mine. Now let's make that 1, and I'll repeat the same thing for the other. Turn that into a 1 millimeter. Still kind of big, but might be able to be workable. And let's make sure that my lid followed suit. Yep, same size. Good, good. All right, cool. So if this looks like you're not going to be able to print this as a solid thing, then, and this might be the safest way to do this anyway. All right, cool. Then we'll just export it like we normally would. All right, lid. Oh, not save. 3D print. Exactly as we would. matches lid. And then same for the base. 3D print. And you can see what I was talking about. When I go to 3D print, the format it saves is an STL. So that's exactly what we're doing anyway. So we'll do matches. Why does it not do that? Base. Okay. Back over to Slicer. And now I'll be able to move these in individually, which probably is the best option. Let me drag and drop both of them. And I'll auto arrange it. And I do need to flip over my base. So I'll select my base object, go to place on face, and then just select the top lid. It flips it over, you're good. If you want to rearrange it again, there you go. Now, ideally, the point of making the hinge lobes like we did with it, just that straight line, that angled line rather, I won't need supports. So I go to print it, there's no errors on there. Granted, mine's much too small and it just won't print properly anyway, because it'll just be like open air kind of thing. But there's no problems with my hinge, so that's cool. So the main thing is, if you have to print these in separate objects, go back, probably just shrink the spheres that you originally made as your hinge points. That will help immensely. Otherwise, if you can, I'm going to do a test print today while we're waiting, see if it'll print properly without adding extra gaps. Otherwise, should be good. The one of the ones I want to show everybody is those of you that made round containers. That's going to be, well, I'm not going to say a problem. It's just going to be a thing. So let me close my Matchbox piece here. Oh, should have saved that. It auto-saved. It's fine. And let's just open one. Let's see here. Inevitably, somebody made a sphere. I know that I saw several. All right. So I'm just going to open yours for a second. So the issue with round things, these slicers don't like to print round things very smoothly. I'll show you why. Now, people on the screen, you're just going to have to wait. Ultimately, what happens, how does a slicer program work? Takes a that's a highlighter. Takes a 3D object. Okay. Where are all the ones that I can use on here? Great. Takes a 3D object, slices it into layers. Cool. Problem is, if you're working with something round, take that round object, start slicing into layers. No problem. No problem. No problem. No problem. No problem. However, once you start getting to the top of that sphere, now my slices get much further apart. Down here, there wasn't that much inward movement per slice. But as I get to the peak of the hemisphere or sphere, it becomes much more stepped over. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Like literally steps, like terraced steps. So with a piece like this, I'm just going to export one of the lid pieces. We'll go to 3D print one of the lid pieces. Okay. And we'll just call this round lid. Cool. All right. Switch back over to my slicer. Now this is where we get to experiment with how can I get the most out of my model. So round lid, as is. So if I kept it this way, I'm going to need supports underneath, which is not really a big deal. Some of these are going to have supports. That's okay. So I know perfectly well going to need supports. So let's switch on build support, or supports build plate only. Just see what that does. Lots and lots of supports. It's not a bad thing. It's just what's necessary. So inside, you can see how insanely well supported it is. Not really necessary, but it's a thing. But main thing I want to show you is at the top, the peak there. It gets very badly stepped. Now I can change the settings here. Let's go to like 0.2 millimeter. Yeah, transfer it all over. 0.2 millimeter height at speed. And let's change that. Let's see. you actually lose a fair amount of the steps, but it's still going to step quite a bit. So that's just kind of one of the downsides. However, this is where we were talking about reorienting things. Now, your first thought might be, well, what if I just flip it over on like, can I just flip it over? Oops, stupid pop up. No. All the way around. Sorry, just trying to rotate it upside down. All right, well, kinda, but you're going to run into a lot of the same problem. And if it doesn't like to print around when it's facing up, it super doesn't like to print around when it's upside down. Let me turn off the supports and show you what I'm talking about. Mainly because now you are trying to create something that already has difficulty stepping up, and stepping up against gravity. So those of you that are making round objects, if you want to print these, we're just going to have to get a little creative. Now, with this one, actually, this will be very convenient that you made yours with this flat spot. So let's try with place on face, and it's at this completely different orientation. So not only does this alter the print pattern, so you'll actually lose a lot of the issue with making those odd stepped layers, it will also greatly reduce the supports needed. So I am going to have to put supports in. Let's switch it on for supports on build plate only. Massive reduction in supports. I forgot to see how long this would have taken between the different ones. So that lid, all right, 3.5 hours. We can certainly do things to tweak that. Things like dial back the layer or dial back the infill. We can change the infill. We can change the support type. So let's go to print settings, support material, and switch from grid to organic. See what that does. Go away pop-ups. Now, it was going to need supports on that little hinge part anyway, so figure that out. All right, yeah, that bumped it up to 4 hours. That's a big change. But it really kind of needs some of those supports. At the same time, maybe we swap it around, and let's try a different orientation, something around the lines of right there. Let's see what that does. Thinking. All right, so that's now 3 hours, 50 minutes. Changes where the support, where that weird spot's going to be. Of course, now it's right in the front, so less desirable, but it did save some time. So there's going to be things you're going to have to just play with the settings, play with some orientations, and see what might be best. Those of you that have things that are asymmetrical, like the lid is just a little cap, and the whole piece, like my matchbox or match container, and the lid is or the body is much larger. Yeah, separate them out, print them separately, but definitely change the size of the little support knobs, the little spheres, make them a little smaller, because that way they can be pressed together afterwards, and we don't have to try to print them exactly at the same time. That means that if you want to do that, that also means you can print the lid and the base as 2 separate colors or even 2 separate materials. The issue there being that if we print them exactly the same time, it has to be the exact same material the whole way through. So those are the requirements, or rather, those are the major things that pop up. Round things are always a bit of a funky business here, but at the same time, if you fiddle around with your settings, you can find the most effective, or at very least, the least problematic way of setting up your model. And sometimes you just kind of have to fiddle around with it to see what works best for you. I'm just going to let it go again. Yeah. So printing it that way, you're going to have a cleaner print, but it's going to take another 30 minutes, which in the long run, okay, whatever. So play around with the different settings, both in your orientation of your model, as well as the different support materials, and play around with how dense the infill is. Sometimes shrinking the infill a little bit can change. Now, with the wall thicknesses of your models, I don't see that being a bunch of an issue or being much of a change. So Keep getting that dry cough today. So play around with your settings, see what works best for you, or at least is less terrible. That's going to be the main thing on this. So good luck with it. I'll help out where I can.